Good morning. A very good morning to yourselves. My name is Ahmad Hassan. I am honored today with the responsibility of ushering you into the Energy Thematic Day. We have a very well-selected set of speakers that will give us their views on the Energy Day as it unfolds. We would like to ask everybody to take their seats, please, so that we can get started. It's 9:05. A kind word to put your phones on silent, please. So let me start by 2 to 3 minutes notes about what's happening here. Of course, we want to welcome our visitors outside of Egypt. Of course, we know that COP27 is an implementation COP, moving from pledges to implementation. Today has been selected as a thematic day for energy. So let me reflect a few thoughts. Energy is a dominant factor in the climate change equation. It has a very strong relevance to everything that happens in the climate change space. Over many decades on this planet, we have chosen a certain pattern of using energy resources that unfortunately got us to where we are today. A very challenging situation with a three-pronged challenge: affordability of getting the energy resources, availability of the resources, and most importantly, the emission related with the use of energy. So we are in a fork in the road that we have to readjust our way of looking at energy. And here comes the energy transition. We are part of Africa. Egypt and 53 other countries, if I count right, live on a very vulnerable continent, probably the most vulnerable to the threat of climate change. We would like to use this COP to start putting things on the ground and get into implementation. So hopefully within a decade or two, we can get closer to the objectives that we want to get to. Let me very quickly tell you how the day is going to unfold. We're going to spend 1 hour here in this high-level remarks by a set of esteemed energy leaders from across the world in Egypt for 1 hour until 10 o'clock. And then follow will be a series of sessions in this room and another series of sessions in the Egypt Pavilion building from 10 o'clock onward. Since we're talking about COP27 as being an implementation COP, I would like to invite your good selves to be with us at noon in the Egypt Pavilion to witness the launch and the signing of a series of projects and MOUs and agreements of different natures to show that we have already started or are about to start in putting words into action. So you're all welcome to witness these activities from 12 to 2 at the Egyptian Pavilion. Without further ado, let me just tell you how we're honored with a set of speakers. On top of the list, of course, the president of COP27, His Excellency, Mr. Sameh Shoukry, the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Mohammed Shakir, Egyptian Minister of Energy and Electricity and Renewable Energy. We have Dr. Amani Abu Zaid to deliver the words of Mr. Moussa Faki Mohammed from African Union Commission. We have Mrs. Kadri Simpson, European Commission. We have Mr. Francesco La Camera, Director General of IRENA, International Renewable Energy Authority Agency. And we have Ms. Mary Bruce Warlick from the IEA. Is she present yet? Oh, I'm sorry. Cool. We were waiting for you, so thank you for coming. So with that quick introduction, I'd like to call His Excellency Mr. Sameh Shoukry to join the podium. Would it be a good idea to have all the speakers on stage from this point forward since the seats are ready? Please. This is not going to be a panel with questions and answers. This is going to be short speeches by their excellencies. Any place, ma'am. We're missing one, I think. Okay. Your Excellency, you're first.
Good morning to all. I'm delighted to be with this distinguished panel. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to participate with you today in the opening of the COP27 thematic day on energy as part of the all-encompassing COP27 presidency program. As you all know, energy is one of the most carbon-intensive sectors in any given economy, making it one of the most important areas to effect meaningful mitigation measures that contribute to addressing climate change and transitioning to a green economy for the future. Science is clear. Global emissions need to be reduced by half by 2030, reaching net zero by 2050. To achieve this, we need to invest in new sources of energy that are clean, affordable, accessible, sustainable, and reliable. And with the ongoing global geopolitical crisis and soaring energy prices, it has become evidently clear that this transition is not only a necessity to address climate change and to reach the Paris Agreement goals, but also represents a clear potential for economic development. According to the International Energy Agency's most recent World Energy Outlook report, potential for fast progress in the field of renewable energy is enormous if strong action is taken immediately to enhance investments in clean electricity and electrification, along with expanding and modernizing grids, offering clear and cost-efficient opportunities to cut emissions more rapidly while bringing electricity costs down from their current highs. During the Sharm el-Sheikh Climate Implementation Summit on the 7th and 8th of November, it was clear that the transition to renewable energy was high on the priorities of world leaders. The political momentum for this transition has never been stronger. Nevertheless, for this transition to happen in an inclusive manner, ensuring that no one and no country is left behind, it needs to be a just transition that takes into account the social and economic dimensions in developing countries, coupled with innovative tools and instruments for mobilizing the needed finance to effect this transition. The African continent is a prime example of the necessity of this just transition, with millions of Africans lacking access to clean and affordable energy, despite the continent's huge potential for renewable energy production, including from solar, wind, and green hydrogen. Ladies and gentlemen, as COP for implementation, I invite you all to consider throughout your discussions and deliberations for the day the concrete steps needed to implement a swift and just energy transition that ensures the fulfillment of the goals of the Paris Agreement while also achieving sustainable development and economic prosperity. Here in Egypt, we've managed to take concrete steps in this direction, significantly increasing the shape of renewables in our energy mix and setting even higher ambition in this regard in our revised NDCs, as well as in our national climate strategy. In the past few days, Egypt has commissioned its first hydrogen plant in the Suez Canal Economic Zone, launched a joint initiative to establish a global renewable hydrogen forum with several other partners to bring together hydrogen producers, off-takers, and the relevant global private sector, as well as signed a number of agreements to further enhance its renewable energy capabilities in the months and years ahead. I trust you will get the chance throughout today to get more familiar with the efforts Egypt is doing in this regard, and I look forward to the outcomes of this session and the ones to follow to ensure that COP27's Energy Day lays out a clear, well-defined path towards scaling up implementation in the field of renewable energy. I thank you, and I apologize I will not be able to stay for the duration of this forum due to other engagements, but I wish you every success and a very productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now to the person who's really carrying the heaviest load in Egypt, Dr. Mohammed Shakir, the Minister of Electricity and Renewable Energy, one of the two ministries that are really carrying the energy vehicle in Egypt, along with the Ministry of Petroleum. I think you'd probably be the most relevant person to the discussion on the panel, that you can give us a good view on what this COP is supposed to do in the future.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, allow me on behalf of the government of Arab Republic of Egypt and on my own behalf to welcome you all in the Energy Day, which is one of the thematic days that are held on COP27 here in the green city of peace, Sharm el-Sheikh. I would like to thank the honorable ministers and excellencies who join us in this important day, and I am sure that our gathering today is an excellent opportunity to fruitful exchange of our views, experiences, and to discuss the crucial issues related to energy and climate change. Honorable ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Earth is witnessing increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events that is impacting the livelihood of millions of people. In addition, the gradually increasing Earth temperature has significant ecological impact which affect our daily lives. These are clear warnings and messages, so we should act now to move into a low-carbon future as pledged in the Paris Agreement. One of the necessary actions that we should globally follow is adopting the implementing energy transition approaches. This will subsequently require changes in the form of production and consumption of electricity. The global energy transition is more than a simple transformation of the energy sector. It is a multi-dimensional transition and is evolving in terms of technological, socio-economics, institutional drivers, and forms of finance. The world now is facing energy crisis of access, security, and sustainability based on long-term underinvestment in resilient energy systems. These crises add to the existing challenges of energy security that contribute to the persistent insufficiency and unreliability of energy systems. In addition to the necessity of reducing emissions globally to preserve our environment. The current energy crisis sheds the light on the challenges faced by developing countries generally, and African countries specifically for energy transition. The fact that confirmed the need to high-level global cooperation in terms of finance, technical support, capacity building, technology transfer. These crises should not lead countries to backtrack on transition. On the contrary, they should sharpen our endeavors to accelerate the implementation plans for energy efficiency and renewable energy. We need to stay focused on the energy transition, its urgency, and the immediate actions that must be taken to avoid climate disasters. 26 COPs have been held. Now we have a much clearer understanding of the extent of the potential climate crisis and what needs to be done. The science is there, and it is clearly shows the urgency to act rapidly to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases and take the necessary steps to support the adaptation action to whom vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. According to the Energy Progress Report 2022, there are 733 million of world's people who live without access to electricity, where 568 million live in the sub-Saharan Africa. Also, there are 2.4 billion people live without access to clean cooking technologies, mostly those people in Africa and Asia. So the transition to green economy must be pursued by all countries and societies to supply all the vulnerable with the modern energy services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable. Such transition is even more crucial to the African countries to alleviate the constraints facing its economic growth, competitiveness, and job creation. Our African continent includes multiple treasures of human resources, minerals, oil and gas, largest arable area in the world, and countless tropical forests. In addition, it has huge potential of renewable energy such as wind, solar, and hydro. Yet most of these treasures are not exploited, and those people live without access to electricity and clean cooking technologies. Moreover, some African countries are already major suppliers of critical minerals required for manufacturing, renewables, and electronics goods to global producers, mainly outside Africa. Hence, by looking at the big picture, the just energy transition should include new development models where the manufacturer of clean technologies is to be located close to the source of raw materials. This will boost the inclusive socio-economic development in Africa, reduce the carbon footprint, and achieve several other sustainable development goals. The participation of the private sector in energy projects in our African continent and all over the world is one of the important matters that should be taken into consideration in order to set procedures and adopt legislation that motivate investors and encourage them to evolve in the implementation of those energy projects. Today, we would like to catalyze several crucial discussions to accelerate the just and equitable energy transition, especially in the Africa, which one of the most vulnerable regions worldwide with the negative impact of climate change. In COP27, the vision is to move from negotiations and planning to implementation. As confirmed in Glasgow COP26, this is a critical decade. This is the decade of action. It is the time for scaled-up action on the ground, including appropriate finance, technical support, capacity building, and technology transfer. It is the time for all implementation of commitments and pledges, new and additional provisions, and mobilization of finance. We must unite to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade and work hard to keep 1.5 degrees centigrade target alive. This requires bold and immediate actions and raising ambition from all parties, in particular those who are in the position to do so, those who can lead by example, and of course the G20 members. Hence, we need to discuss today innovation and non-conventional solutions for enabling sustainable and renewable energy resources to have a key role in securing energy and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, we need to address the key energy technology breakthroughs required to enable renewables to replace fossil fuels. Moreover, we need to explore the role that green hydrogen can play as an energy vector in the transition process and reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Also, I would like to refer to the initiative that has been launched collaboratively by His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and His Excellency Mr. Alexander De Croo, Prime Minister of Belgium, for Renewable Hydrogen Global Forum, which will represent a platform for a sustained dialogue between producers and consumers of green hydrogen, private sector, organizations, and IFIs to coordinate policies and procedures. The forum will create corridors for trade and investment in hydrogen that contribute in accelerating the just transition. The latest statistics for renewable energy provided by ARENA impose some alarms. Concessional finance, including grants and low-cost project-level debt, only constituted 4% of the total investment in renewable energy in the previous years. According to ARENA as well, regions dominated by developing and emerging economies attract only 15% of the global renewable energy investment. According to ARENA as well, multilateral DFIs only contribute to about 3% of the total renewable energy investment. In addition, there is a huge funding gap between the climate finance provided to African countries and the finance required to fully implement their NDCs. To be well below 2 degrees centigrade and work hard to keep the 1.5 degrees centigrade target alive, it is the time to provide more dedicated climate action support to African countries. It is also the time to start applying innovative climate finance instruments like green bonds, for example. However, to ensure just transition as well, the selected financing instruments should not affect the poor people in Africa, should not result in high market prices of basic commodities. We all have to work jointly in implementing the Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations with 17 goals in order to transform our world. We should work together to deliver and mobilize required finance to implement this agenda and building capacities of the developing world. In this context, our government has taken unprecedented bold steps and action regarding energy transition, which could be considered as a model for peer countries, and we are open to share these experiences with developing countries, especially the African ones, to help them in developing and implementing their own tailored models of energy transition. Finally, I would like to thank the participating ministers, energy commissioners, representatives of international and regional organizations, ambassadors, and stakeholders who supported us in organizing this day, and also those who attend this day. And I am sure that our discussion today will contribute in setting framework to achieve our ambitions in the field of energy transition and sustainability. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Shakir. Appreciate it. Very well elaborate view on the whole issue. Moving from the Ministry of Electricity to one of the big players in this game, which is the African Union Commission. We know that Mr. Moussa Faki Mohammed was supposed to be here, but Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, who many of you know her well, will deliver his speech. You could just do it while sitting there. Okay.
May I have your microphone?
Sure.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I will deliver the speech on behalf of His Excellency, Mr. Moussa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union. And I quote, Excellency, Dr. Mohammed Shakir Markabi, Honorable Minister of Electricity and Renewable Energy of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Excellency, Dr. Tariq Al-Mulla, Minister of Oil and Petroleum, the Arab Republic of Egypt, Honorable Ministers, Honorable and Excellencies Commissioner, EU Commissioner, distinguished participants, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. On behalf of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, I greet you all and welcome you to one of the most important days of COP27, the Energy Day. I would like at the outset to thank His Excellency, the President, the government, and the people of Egypt for the hospitality, welcoming the largest number of participants in any COP, and for brilliantly hosting an excellent COP focusing on implementation and action. You are doing Africa proud. I wish to also thank the global community for its continued efforts to address the twin challenges of development and of climate change. I'm really delighted to be with you here today for three reasons. First, because this is a very important day. Ensuring access to efficient, reliable, modern, and sustainable energy for all Africans and for the whole world is critical to achieve transformative and inclusive development that promotes and enhances economic, human, social development in our continent. I wish here to express my appreciation to Egypt for championing Africa's common position for universal access to energy and just and equitable transition throughout this world gathering. Second reason, what I have witnessed throughout last week made me more optimistic, and I have a good reason to be. The title and focus of this COP is implementation and action. The sheer number of initiatives and actions launched last week, many addressing Africa's challenges, and the active presence of stakeholders and partners in such impressive numbers is a strong sign that the world is coming together despite successive crises. As the African saying goes, many hands make light work. We must make light work, and to make it work fast, at scale, and for everyone. Third, Africa's huge and relatively untapped energy resources could drive the energy access and transition agenda at all levels, including regional, national, and local levels, even beyond our continent for export as well. This is a huge investment opportunity, not to be missed. This will be important to address the twin challenges of energy development and climate change on the continent. Excellencies, distinguished participants, we in Africa are committed to following a low-carbon pathway despite accounting for only 3% of global GHG emissions, as evidenced by our regional and national plans in the renewable energy commitments and targets in all African initiatives, like the geothermal program in East Africa, the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative Array, the many energy generation and regional transmission projects in our African infrastructure program are just a few examples. As we develop renewable energy, we must, however, recognize that Africa cannot be powered only by renewable energy due to their intermittency. Natural gas will remain a critical part of the energy mix for Africa in the short and medium term to ensure reliability, affordability, and security of energy supplies and to power clean cooking. The conflict in Europe has shown the need to be practical and realistic on energy transition. We should therefore prioritize and support the development of all resources in Africa to expedite universal access, provide clean cooking, build solid energy systems. Yet, we must keep our eyes collectively on a greener future. We must not lose focus on ensuring we meet Paris Agreement to keep the world's temperature to not more than 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial level. Excellencies, distinguished participants, achieving net zero emissions cannot be achieved with zero financing. African countries need significant financial resources to deliver just energy transition, about 130 billion a year. Leveraging resources, grants, and guarantees to mobilize the funding needed to implement the political commitments on just transition. A sustainable future for Africa must be inclusive and provide greater opportunities for the youth and women. Here also, the African Union has been implementing projects ensuring that women are part of each and every step of the supply chain. Clean energy transition agenda is a huge task, but it's not impossible. What is needed as a first step is a political leadership and commitment at the global level, driven by concrete actions and strategies, as well as financial and technical resources for implementation. This COP is presenting the opportunity for global stakeholders to consider these unique realities and needs for Africa, and equally important, to honor the commitments. The African Union countries have also deepened the mainstreaming of climate actions and energy transition principles into our national energy development plans and priorities. This is necessary to ensure ownership as well as harmonized ambitions and strategies towards an integrated and data-driven approach to addressing energy and climate change challenges which will in turn lead to the development of needs-based policies and financial instruments for an effective energy transition. One of the key strategies the African Union Commission is undertaking is the focus on regional energy infrastructure development. I mentioned the program for infrastructure development, but also a huge undertaking, which is the African single electricity market, which will be completed by 2040. Achieving Africa's energy transition agenda requires the implementation also of adequate policies, regulatory and institutional frameworks that are needed to create a conducive environment for businesses as well as consumers. Excellencies, distinguished participants, the mobilization of adequate financial and technical resources will be critical. I said that. The transfer of knowledge, the localization of industries is critical for not only decarbonizing, but also for job creation, for socioeconomic benefits. I would like to use this opportunity to call upon all stakeholders, including private sector, financial institutions, public sector, multilateral, civil society, research institutions, among others, from all parts of the world, to join us in a fantastic journey in Africa to ensure clean energy agenda in our continent. I would also like to use the opportunity to call upon the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt to continue the championing and promotion of African initiatives on energy access and just transition during this COP and beyond, and I thank you. End of quote.
Thank you, Dr. Amani. So 3 very powerful speeches that passed representing the COP presidency, the views of the Egyptian energy sector, and now the African Union. Let's now switch to the outside world, the international or global agencies, mainly or namely we have IEA, we have IRENA, and the EU. I'm going to start now with the European Union with Commissioner Kadri Simpson, the Energy Commissioner at the EU. The EU has been a very good friend of Egypt, has been very active in the area of climate change and many, many programs that we're very familiar with. I'm sure you'll give us a very good view. I just want to make one comment that what I heard so far in the 3 past comments were the very strong need for finance. I mean, finance seems to be the hinge where everything is revolving around. So with that, would you please step, do you want to do it while seated? Okay, please go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it is an honor to be here in this distinguished company, and also at an event that has become pivotal for the future of our planet. And I'm certain that this venue gathers during these 2 COP weeks more knowledge and expertise, but also more enthusiasm and determination than any other place on the planet right now. I want to thank Egypt for being a great host and wish the presidency all the success in reaching an ambitious agreement by the end of the conference, because the world needs it. The science and our eyes agree. The climate change is already here with wildfires, droughts, floods, and we must do more to tackle it. NH has always been central to winning the fight against climate change, and the majority of the world's greenhouse gases are created by the production and consumption of energy. So without decarbonizing our energy systems, net zero will remain out of our reach. Since the unilateral and unprovoked Russian aggression against Ukraine, energy has also been at the heart of the economic and geopolitical discussions around the globe. Russia's action have triggered the global energy and food crisis that affects all of us, and the most vulnerable most of all. But Russia's use of energy as a weapon has an unintended side effect. In fact, it has given a strong push to the clean energy transition, and we have been given another reason to end our dependency on fossil fuels. We already knew that fossil fuels are bad for our planet, but now more people in Europe have come to understand why relying on them is foolish for our security too. And in the Europe, we have committed to end our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. We have already decided to stop using Russian coal and oil, and we are now focusing on our efforts on natural gas. And from the start, we have known that this means speeding up the green transition. Our strategy is to tackle both the climate and energy crisis at the same time, and this strategy is called Repower EU. And this strategy has three main pillars. First of all, it requires renewable revolution. A renewable-based energy system is our way to net zero, and it's also our way to our energy independence, because renewables are homegrown, and they come with much fewer energy security risks than fossil fuels. And we are already making a good progress. In 2022, this will be a great year for renewables in Europe. The EU's new renewable capacity is set to more than double to 50 gigawatts. But we need to move even faster, and the Commission has already proposed that our target for 2030 should be 45% of renewables in our energy mix. And to get there, we have to tackle some challenges. The most challenging one is permitting process, but we are willing to act fast. And this is an opportunity for new clean energy partnership also with countries around the world. And already at COP27, we are signing several important bilateral agreements, in particular on hydrogen. So let me be clear, the EU is not planning to increase our natural gas consumption, not in this winter nor beyond that winter. And for this winter, EU member states already have agreed that we will reduce our natural gas consumption by 15%, and we are well on the way to achieve that target. And we have also agreed to use less electricity, especially at the peak hours. And these steps are also important in the context of the tight global energy markets, where Europe will lower our demand that can ease the situation for others. As with renewables, we are planning to upgrade our mandatory target also for energy efficiency to make sure that cutting consumption this winter will not be only a short-term trend. So this helps us also to make sure that we will deliver on the promises we have made in Paris, and we can cut our emissions significantly by 2030, so at least 55%. And then, of course, right now, to face these current challenges, we are diversifying our energy supplies and suppliers, because only last year Russia represented 40% of our natural gas imports. Now it's down to 9%, and at any moment it can be down to 0%. And we are reaching out to our reliable suppliers around the world, because we want to create relationships and to strengthen relationships that go beyond natural gas. And we are looking also for the future cooperation, for example, on renewable hydrogen or other clean technologies. And one example of this cooperation is a MOU that we will sign tomorrow with Egypt on renewable hydrogen. So, ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned earlier the impact of the Russian war that it has had on the world, and especially on developing countries. And this reminds us again of the responsibility that the developed world has to support the green transition globally. A just and fair transition is an opportunity for all nations, and renewable energy can be a great leveler, as wind and solar resources are much more widely available than oil and gas. But we must be careful that these opportunities will indeed materialize for all, not just for few. And European Union is committed to support developing and emerging economies to reap the benefits of renewable energy and energy efficiency. And among other things, these provide a solution to the additional challenge of electricity and clean cooking access, in particular in the African continent. And today, just after this event, we will witnessed the launch of the COP27 Presidency initiative for a just and affordable energy transition in Africa that aims to provide energy access to 300 million people. For the European Union, working with Africa is bridging this energy access gap. And this is a priority of ours. At our last summit with the African Union, so summit this spring, EU-African Summit, we launched the Global Gateway investment package for Africa and the Africa EU Green Energy Initiative. And EU will mobilize about 3.4 billion euros of grants from its budget to support renewable energy and energy efficiency and the just transition and the greening of local value chain. And together with other G7 members, we are also fully behind the just transition and energy partnerships. These support the just transition process in partner countries with substantial coal dependence. The first partnership like that was launched last year with South Africa at COP26. And during COP27, we will, and this is also discussed at G20 summit right now in Bali, we will finalize the next partnership with Indonesia. And we continue our work too with Vietnam and Senegal and India to reach similar deals. With $27 billion US spent in 2020, and again in 2021, the EU and our member states are the biggest providers of public climate finance. We are also the world's leading contributor of development assistance, and we are committed to increase our climate financing in the years to come. But we know that funding the energy transition is not just about public finances. We need to build the regulatory framework and the financial incentives and markets to incentivize green energy growth. The business model for renewables and energy efficiency gets stronger by the year. And the right investments, we can ensure our energy security and the health of our planet and life are necessary, and we will continue our work to provide them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Simpson. Thank you very much for elaborating. We have two speakers left. We were supposed to get Irina next, but I'm going to ask your permission, Mr. La Camera, to let the IEA representative go first because she has another engagement, if you don't mind. I was sure that you would accept. So let me introduce Ambassador Mary Warlick from the IEA. Without further ado, please go ahead, because I know you're short on time.
Thank you so much for your understanding. Thank you, Mr. La Camera. I really appreciate it. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really honored to be with all of you today representing the IEA. And I'd like to begin by conveying special thanks, of course, to the Egyptian Presidency as host of this COP. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for welcoming all of us, and thank you for your strong focus on implementation on this Energy Day. All of us here today know that and understand the centrality of decarbonizing the energy sector, which stands as over 3/4 of emissions today. We all know its centrality, but we also know the complexities of decarbonizing a truly global energy system completely by 2050. And this has become even more apparent this year as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has disrupted energy trade and driven up prices for energy, food, and fertilizers. This is affecting everyone, but it's disproportionately affecting those in developing countries. So this brings us to the other great challenge in the energy sector, reaching universal access to electricity and clean cooking aligned with SDG 7, as has been mentioned. And nowhere is this challenge more daunting than here in Africa. IEA data shows that around 600 million people, or 48% of Africa's population, still lacks access to electricity, and over 900 million lack access to clean cooking. Again, I know it's been referenced, but the scale is really, really significant. Furthermore, the latest estimates show that for the first time in decades, the number of people without access to electricity is actually expected to rise in 2022, so the trends are moving in the wrong direction. The IEA's net zero roadmap shows there's no way to net zero without achieving universal access. And this is why the IEA is honored to support the COP27 presidency in its Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition Initiative, just mentioned by the European Commissioner, to be launched later today, which aims to have the number of Africans without access to electricity by 2027 and provide clean cooking access for an additional 300 million people, all while increasing the share of renewable energy by 25% by 2027. The IEA sees its Africa Energy Outlook, sees in its Africa Energy Outlook that renewables will be the backbone of providing this electricity. 80% of additional electricity generation for the coming decade will come from renewable energy led by solar PV. And these numbers are not based on ideology, but on simple economics. Africa hosts 60% of the world's best solar energy resources, making solar PV already the cheapest source of power generation in several parts of Africa, and it is set to outcompete all other sources on the continent by 2030. The outlook also sees a role for natural gas, but it is often outcompeted in the power sector and instead is used to support rising industrial uses, especially for desalination and fertilizers. And Africa also concentrates some of the largest reserves of critical minerals, with around 40% of cobalt, manganese, and platinum, all essential for batteries and hydrogen-related technologies. And these resources are key to support energy transitions worldwide. But to realize this energy development pathway, the global community needs to support rising levels of energy investment across Africa. And to reach universal access, the IEA estimates 25 billion is needed in every year to the end of this decade, that is by 2030, to achieve universal access. But this is well within our reach, and to put this in perspective, this is the cost of just one large LNG terminal being built today. As we're all gathered in Egypt today, I'd like to call your attention to a local success story right here in Egypt in relation to clean energy transitions. In 2014, Egypt was facing an important electricity deficit with regular power outages and a challenge to meet growing electricity demand in the country. And to respond to this crisis, the country significantly reformed its electricity sector by recovering costs and gradually lifting subsidies. And this was done in parallel with an updated regulatory framework to attract investments in renewable sources of energy. So the result, Egypt outperformed its own objectives, achieving a state of renewable energy, a share of renewable energy in power generation, which stands at around 20% in 2022. And its next goal is to reach 42% by 2035. So congratulations, Mr. Minister. In short, Egypt managed to turn a power deficit into a surplus in less than 5 years. And I think we can all learn from this outstanding example. So let me just conclude by saying we all know the energy sector finds itself at the heart of multiple crises, facing unprecedented challenges. But the fact that we're all present here at COP27 shows this strong conviction, both in Africa and really all across the globe, to respond to and overcome these challenges and turn them into unprecedented opportunities. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you, and I wish you all a really productive and wonderful Energy Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the brief comment, but now that places a huge pressure on Francesco, because everybody says renewable energy is next. So I think you're going to be the victim. That's why we kept you until last. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Ahmed, and ministers, excellencies, dear friends. Thanks for inviting Arena to be part of this discussion on this the opening of this Energy Day. I wish to start to congratulate my friend in the Egyptian government for many reasons. You know, sometimes the journalists come and say, what has to happen for be considered the COP27 a success? My response is that the COP27 is already a success. Not only because it has been organized in a perfect way, put this aside, but the fact that you had the courage to put the implementation at the top of what has to be discussed. We are now a few years that we are insisting in say, perhaps this because of my past work as a negotiator in the context of the previous COP to Paris and beyond. I think that you are changing the mood of the COP. So trying to move from the negotiation approach, where we spend nights to delete or cancel a word, a comma, and making things happening on the ground. So look what's happening here. Or how many, not commitment, but how many signing of real money moving from place to another is happening in these days. The Just Transition Initiative, the Green Hydrogen Renewable Energy Forum. From our side, we can say also the Alliance for Industrial Decarbonization, where we see finally government and private sector working together. Here is happening. Sometimes when I try to compare what's happening here in the room of negotiation, I say, here is happening in the real life. We are changing way things are doing. If you see also this initiative, I'm not really ready to pronounce perfectly the NUIFI, no? That is also an example how we can put in practice. So make commitment becoming reality. I think we don't need any more strong political declaration or commitment. We have 135 countries already committed to net zero. It's time to think about how make this happening. And I think you put the seeds for this change. And I hope who will follow next month and will follow your example and focusing more and more on the ground. So thanks for this, honestly. At least there's something that I wish to thank you about. We have made clear in our World Energy Transition Outlook that the future of the energy system will be in some way driven by the electrification and the energy efficiency in the system. And this will be enabled by renewables. The incoming energy system will be dominated by renewables, complemented by hydrogen, mainly green hydrogen, and the sustainable use of biomass. Believe me, this is unstoppable. This will happen. But the question we have, the previous energy system, the one we are still living, had not this problem. It takes decades for building the infrastructure to make the system work, and still we have in Africa 600 million people left behind. Unfortunately, in the building of this new energy system, and this is already happening, we have no time. Time is the most important variable. If you don't do this in time, we will experiment, perhaps also our generation, I afraid, we will still there, but the next generation will really afford the worst impact of climate change. So time is the most important variable in this exercise, and we have to change the gear of our path. We have to raise the scale and the speed of this transformation. On this, allow me to emphasize 5 key points. First, for the energy transition to be fair and equitable, we need to ensure that funds are increasingly directed to countries that have so far not been able to attract investment. Africa, in the last 20 years, gets a few % of the total investment in renewables. It's just numbers, it's the reality. Let you judge if it is fair or not it is. 70% of the world population receive less than 20% of renewable investment, and for Africa, this percentage is more dramatic. Second, the risk investment. We have seen that already in this COP is starting to have concrete action to decrease in investment, because naturally capital, the cost of capital is relevant. Capital will go where it will be less expensive, no? That's for sure. Third, the strategic use of public finance to leverage private investment, policy framework, and the last point that I want to make, and I will take 2 minutes and I will close the Ahmed, so I don't want to take, I will not be so long. I have experimented that after certain minutes, the people are starting to do this, so I will try to be very, very, very
No,
rapid on
it's
this.
just that the next session, I think, started to come in.
Perfect.
That's why. But
That's
please
good.
go right ahead.
No,
You're right
I will end in 2 minutes, but I want to make this point. This is a point that I'm trying to make also in other occasions here. So don't think that it will be possible to transit to the new energy system at the speed needed if you don't change the way we look at the infrastructure. Africa is a wonderful continent, and I see many things happening. But this will be not enough if we don't rethink the way the international cooperation works. I'm sure about what I'm saying, because this was happened in the past, and that's to happen here. You know, people say, oh, variable is an intermittency source of power. What is gas or oil today? So what makes the difference in the intermittency or not is the infrastructure. If you don't have pipeline, if you don't have port, if you don't have ships, if you have the right ships, the system cannot work. Renewables are not intermittency. The renewables are always there. It's our task to put infrastructure to make the best use of renewables. And this also has to, in some way, push a reflection on what is the role of every one of us in this exercise. We as an international organization, but also who is going to fund, who is going to realize this infrastructure? Can it be a single country? No. So it's here where we can make the difference, where government can make the difference, making clear what is the goal of the multilateral financial institutions. The goal of the multilateral financial institution is to make in practice the infrastructure that we need for a renewable energy system to be there. I have no doubt. And other may do the other job, the infrastructure concerning the legal environment. This could be task of energy agency like our bilateral agreement, could be this one. As important also the institutional infrastructure, where also bilateral agency like our can have a role. And also I think it's important when we talk about infrastructure, Africa can have an industrial sector that works. Why they have sell mineral rare earth around the world when they can use here? They can make their own factory. They are competitive. They can build solar panels. They can be I'd say, offshore wind. Here it's possible. Why we don't collaborate? Why we don't abandon the predatory approach that has been in the past decades, the way the developed world has been present here in Africa? I think this is the challenge that we have. And believe me, I am with us and with you.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you. Very important 2 points of all the good stuff that you said. Time, we don't have the luxury of time. Energy transition, just as in fair, it needs to be considered for Africa. Thank you very much. Dr. Shekhar, would you like to make any comment at the end? Well, thank you very much. Apology for going over time by 5 minutes, but it was a very informative session. Thank you very much.
want me? Right next to Minister Shaker, so in this one, please. Yes, please, please, please.
We take seat now?
Yeah. Sorry, Patrick.
Okay, of course.
Because we have a lady here.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Just one? Original, right?
So I think it's good. We miss only the melona.
And Fanta is right there. Could you please take your seats? Faten está ahí. Yes. Could you please take your seats? If you can please take your seats, we will close the doors and begin momentarily. Thank you very much, and good morning. My name is Glenn Pierce-Oros. I'm the Senior Director of International Relations and Special Projects with Sustainable Energy for All, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session for a just and affordable energy transition in Africa. This is an extremely important challenge that the COP27 presidency has decided to prioritize. It decided to prioritize this challenge as a signal of the importance of Africa in the new global energy map, as well as signaling the importance of moving forward towards implementation. And this we know is the implementation COP, as was highlighted in the previous session. We will first hear from COP27 presidency outlining the Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition Initiative. We will then turn our discussion to African leaders and African leadership, the importance of African leadership in this initiative, as well as complementing with the role of partners and financing needs in terms of what happens with this initiative. We will end the session with a strategic value of the AJA ETP over the next 5 years and conclude the session at that time. Without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Sheikher El-Markabi, Minister of Electricity and Renewable Energy, to the podium for his remarks on the just and affordable energy transition in Africa. Excellency.
Thanks a lot. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, and on behalf of the government of Arab Republic of Egypt and on my own behalf, to welcome you all in Egypt. I would like to thank all of you for your presence and participation in the Energy Day activities in the second session titled for the just and affordable energy transition in Africa. During the thematic days of the 27th sessions of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, COP27. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the African continent is one of the richest regions in the world in terms of natural resources, especially renewable energy sources in addition to manpower. The continent has recorded promising growth indicators over the past decade, although it still suffers from a lack of access to energy and faces many challenges, such as the lack of infrastructure, as well as the high cost and difficulty in securing the required financing, which negatively affect the competitiveness of the African continent and its participation in global markets. The transition to a green economy must be pursued by all countries and societies to supply with modern energy services that are affordable, reliable, and sustainable. The international community has realized the importance of climate change and moving towards sustainability. These visions have been integrated through the goals set by the United Nations to achieve sustainability, SDGs. However, achieving these goals requires political will and collaborative action to implement and follow up the required reforms. This underlines the importance of initiatives that strengthen regional and global partnerships and coordinate efforts to advance various development issues. Today, talks about the global transformation of energy system has become a reality to achieve a sustainable economy that includes unlimited opportunities for cooperation between countries, taking into account the social and environmental benefits. Hence, we are proudly announcing today the initiative for a just and affordable energy transition in Africa as a participatory framework between the African continent countries and several international partners and funding organizations to achieve constructive communications to accelerate a just and sustainable energy transformation for the continent. This initiative has three main objectives. To consolidate and facilitate technical and policy support that will make just and affordable energy transition in all African countries financially viable, and securing access to affordable energy by 2027 for at least 300 million Africans. Second, transition towards clean cooking for 300 million out of 923 million which have no access to clean cooking fuels and technologies by 2027. Third, transition towards green energy by increasing the share of renewable energy by 25% by the year 2027. African countries according to their readiness levels. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this initiative has been designed to unify, integrate, and harmonize existing programs and initiatives, whether those working to increase access to electricity or those related to implementing measures and identifying technical and financing gaps, with the aim of providing a model for cooperation that puts the African energy system on a new path. The implementation of this initiative will require the integrated effort of leading African governments, regional institutions, financiers, and international partners. And in this regard, I would like to thank all partners from Sustainable Energy for All, International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, and International Energy Agency, IEA, for their constructive effort and wishing to continue our cooperation with them and with additional international bodies and institutions to ensure the achievements of the initiative's objective. Finally, I would like to assure our commitment to work closely with every African country as well as with African and international partners and institutions, wishing the participation of all African countries and supporters to the initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shaker, and especially thank you for making your remarks on time so that we can get back on track. I would like to invite now to complement those remarks by Dr. Shaker, Dr. Ahmed Mohamed Mohina, Head of Strategic Planning, Performance, and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy. Dr. Mohina, if you can please provide us with some more parameters on the Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition Initiative. 5 minutes, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. Glenn, honorable ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, all of you. I know that the time is very limited, so I will be very quick to deliver my speech in the limited time. I would like to start from the facts. Facts in Africa that there is, according to the Energy Progress Report 2022 of Sustainable Development Goals, that 568 million African people don't have access to electricity, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa. And also, around 923 million African countries don't access to clean cooking and technologies. Now we are in the COP27. We have a main target of the COP27 to move for implementation. Together for implementation is the title for COP27. So we need to move from negotiation, from texts, from pledges, to for implementation. It's now we have to move rapidly towards action on the ground. We already organized a lot of meetings. We prepare many documents targeting to prepare our initiative. This initiative which His Excellency Dr. Shaker just announced it, just launched it now, took a lot of time to prepare it in cooperation with our partners, with our friends, globally and regionally in Africa. This initiative has 3 main objectives to achieve by 2027, securing access to affordable for at least 300 million African people. Second, transition toward the clean cooking for 300 million Africans. Third, increasing the share of renewable energy by 25 by 2027, and obtain a power sector based on renewable energy by 2063, in the line of the 2063 agenda of Africa we want. The initiative is framed in 3 elements to accelerate preparation, financing, implementation for all African countries' energy strategies. The first, maintaining a collective leadership voice to promote a holistic approach to energy. Second, ensuring the access to technical assistance and advisory support. Third, facilitating access to new technologies and innovative solutions. To achieve the objectives of the initiative, the initiative will operate in 4 main areas of activities. First, to provide an umbrella for the existing energy-related initiatives in Africa and catalyze action around possible gaps. Second, to secure technical and policy support for transition, including peer-to-peer exchange and dissemination of best practice and success and case studies. The success studies and the best practice may be from south to south in Africa, may be from north to south, from Europe to Africa, and from north to south. Also, to help governments to access the resources and support organizations and the initiatives within the energy transition space. All African countries needs help in the phase of design, in the phase of planning, and also in the phase of implementation. So it is a very good rule and a very important rule of the developed country to assess and to help our African countries. Fourth, to develop archetypes of starting and end points to capture the diversity of the continent and outline possible strategies and potential energy mix for transition. These all 4 areas, how we can achieve our initiative. It is very ambitious initiative. How we can governance the initiative to be sustained, to be continued, to secure the success of this initiative. We have 2 options. The first one, to give this initiative for one of the existing organizations to host this initiative and also to start the implementation of the initiative. The other option, create an independent facility to advise and implement possible just energy transition pathway in Africa. This slide shows our targets for selecting our partners to help us in the implementation of the initiative. Many of partners, regionally in Africa, regionally in the region, globally in the international. We hope that if all of partners can join our initiative to give the initiative more strong to achieve its goals. Thank you so much for good attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mokina, and thank you for giving us some ideas of the parameters of the initiative. We now know what COP27 presidency has put forth as something that's important to implement. It will be important to also be able to involve as much as possible African leadership. And so for this next part of the conversation, we have the pleasure of having with us Her Excellency Damilola Ogunbiyi, CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All. We have His Excellency Matthew Opoku Prempe, Minister of Energy of the Republic of Ghana, and Her Excellency Ruth Nankabirwa, who is the Minister of Energy and Mineral Development of the Republic of Uganda. So we will take this next segment and start focusing on what it is that all 3 of you are seeing in terms of the initiative that COP27 presidency is interested in moving forward. And I'd like to start with you, Damilola, if possible. Could we have another microphone, please, on stage?
Hello. Hello, thank you very much for having me here. And I just really want to commend the COP presidency of really focusing on what does the just transition really look like and the energy transition for Africa. I think it's important for us first to recognize that energy transition in Africa is energy access. Africa needs more energy, not less energy. It needs energy to industrialize. It needs energy to get people out of poverty. It needs energy to make sure we also achieve our gender targets. With that at hand, and looking at our net zero commitments, we also have to do that in a climate-friendly way. We believe Africa is that continent that has the opportunity not to have to come back after 2 or 3 decades and transition again because it's starting at such a low base. But again, it means that climate, energy, and development has to go hand in hand. You can't do one instead of the other because, you know, Africa wants what the developed world wants as well, and they want it in a better climate-friendly way. I think another important point that we need to build on is that this is an emergency for the African continent. And as we say Africa, we have to recognize that Africa is made up of a whole load of countries. Right? And I'm happy that the COP presidency has recognized that. Even within Africa, no 2 countries are going to have the same energy transition pathway. And what we try and do, and what we've been doing at Sustainable Energy for All, is helping countries determine what is their pathway. So for example, in my country, Nigeria, the pathway was to uplift 100 million people out of poverty, to make sure Nigeria has the right industrial base, and to do that in a climate-friendly way. You really need to listen to the countries and develop it with the countries. And then finally, you need proper government and political support. Again, you can't really do that without presenting facts. It's all well and good to tell people, please say net zero by 2050, 2060, 2070. But what does that mean? What does that mean to the thinking of your entire economy? What does that mean to the policies you have to put in place? Again, you can only get there with data. And we found presenting the right, correct, accurate evidence to governments that they do support this energy transition. And you'll find out that African countries actually have much more ambitious energy transition targets than their counterparts in the global north. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamilola, for giving us that overview in terms of what is needed in Africa and what we cannot forget when we talk about Africa. If we zoom into a country experience, Mr. Prempe from Ghana, I'm aware that Ghana is already starting to take the next steps on its energy transition. In light of what you heard from the COP27 presidency, what is the critical support that Ghana would be looking for in terms of its energy transition?
Thank you, Glenn. Profound thanks to the COP presidency, Egypt, for a really wonderful initiative, an African-wide initiative to galvanize support in the direction Africa wants to go. I'm happy Demilola just stated a fact. Africa is not one country. From Senegal to Eritrea, from South Africa to Libya. Africa is a huge continent with very, very diversified interests for each country. Where, example, geothermal energy would not work in West Africa, but it may work in East Africa. So it's good that every country embarks on an energy transition in a just way, taking context of their own circumstance in the various countries to outline a step. After COP26, the President of the Republic of Ghana decided that we should find out how we are going to go on this just transition. Because there's an erroneous impression being created. Africa is not interested in polluting the world for its development agenda. It wants to work with the best, the most efficient and clean, sustainable fuels possible. But there again, we are not all the same. Where some have reached in this development is not where others are at now. So it's important that our transitions are in our context. So I don't see any unambitious transition so far from any country. I have seen, example, in Ghana, we launched our energy transition framework. We are working with SC for All to collaborate to make it investor ready. But you look in our investment framework, energy transition framework, and what you find is Ghana telling the world that if we are going to transit on our own resources, this is how long it's going to take us. If you want us to do it quicker, then come and help. Because since 2015, The pledges, the promises, it's good that Egypt is doing this initiative. The promises and the pledges have never been realized. In the decade 2010 to 2022, of the nearly $2.2 trillion that was invested in clean renewable fuel, only 2% came to Africa. In that regard, if we go on that same trajectory, if Africans say they are going to wait for the West to come and help us transit or bring the support, it might take 300 years. But we don't want that. Because we are already, of the 50 countries most affected by climate change, 35 are in Africa. The continent that has not polluted is suffering from the severest hardships of the climate change agenda. And we feel it, we know it. If Lagos floods, Accra has flooded, South Africa has flooded, because we are brothers on the continent. So what is the continent doing? So that is why we came here to launch our framework, hoping to work with SC for All to make it investor ready and go and seek the necessary support. But we are not hoping, we are hoping that by the time that as our targets that we set, over 70% of energy mix in Ghana will be clean, renewable by 2070. What form that will take depends upon how we get the support and how we move into that direction. So again, I'm happy with the initiative talking about collaborating for the technical assistance and the necessary technology. When Africa says that it wants to use gas as a transition fuel, it really has to use gas as a transition fuel, or else it means that we should die. If Ghana doesn't use gas as its transition fuel, if Uganda or Senegal doesn't use gas as its transition fuel, what should it use? Because now the renewable solar is not up to supplying the energy needs of the continent. We don't have the technology and we don't have the resources as at now to be able to undertake that journey. So yes, we need an affordable and a just energy transition and an equitable energy transition that will situate that every African country moves in the direction. In my own country, the burden is on clean cooking and fuels from automobiles, right? Because of all the thermal generators in the country, we have moved from liquid fuel to gas. In Ghana, almost 90% of our energy, electricity, is produced from gas sources. And we have also made sure that energy access in the country is over 88% as we speak. Last mile is difficult to get. We want to do off-grids, mini-grids, standalone systems to make sure that everybody gets the energy it's needed. Because the energy is not a luxury. It is a right. Imagine a female going to getting into labor and getting to a hospital without energy. The cost. Most of the cooking that is done in the country, giving us health problems and pollution and everything, is done by wood fuel and charcoal. So a country like Niger, it is losing its forest nearly over 100,000 acres per year. It wants to exploit its gas to be able to protect the environment. So we need really a collaborative institution like the initiative that has been launched that would advocate for Africa, speak with institutions around the continent, know each and everybody's problems, and really, technically, to enhance the capacity of Africans to be able to not only become aware of the environmental disaster that is already happening in Africa, but how we can all collaboratively work to have it eliminated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Prempa from Ghana. And Dr. Shaker, you're laying out a vision. SRSG Ogumbi is recognizing that vision is extremely important for all of Africa, not to forget any of Africa. Minister Prempe is demonstrating that type of implementation that we're all looking for that's already happening in Ghana. And now we turn to Uganda and Honorable Minister Nankabirwa, who, from Uganda's perspective, is also a major player in the East Africa power pool. And so a perspective from you, Honorable Minister, would be what type of collaboration with your neighbors do you see as pivotal in terms of a just and affordable energy transition?
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. I want to add my voice to those who have congratulated Egypt for having organized this wonderful COP27. My voice is not different from my colleagues. Africa is endowed with natural resources, and I believe that through exploitation of these natural resources that we will see a just transition. Other countries have done it. So what Uganda did is to make sure that we focus on generation. You may establish networks, but if you don't have power generated, what will you supply through those networks? So the natural resources that we have must be exploited. A country like Uganda with potential for geothermal, 1,500 megawatts, geothermal. Nuclear, some countries don't want us to talk about the nuclear potential. We need to exploit the resource that we have to get this power. The nuclear potential for Uganda is 2,771 megawatts. So our plan is to focus on generation and then establish the network. So far we have the East African Power Pool comprising of 11 countries. We are establishing transmission lines from Uganda to South Sudan, from Uganda to DRC. We are supplying power to Kenya, to Rwanda, but we still need power ourselves inside Uganda, and this is a challenge, a political challenge, where people ask, why are you taking power to Kenya when we don't have power? But we need to collaborate. A country that has green minerals like Uganda, we have copper, we have cobalt, we have lithium. Why wouldn't you switch on to e-mobility? We are trying it, and we have put in place the laws that will encourage us exploit our green metals, green minerals. And we hope to get the batteries from the cobalt that we have so that we can enhance our e-mobility. There are trucks in Uganda which are plying, which are electrical. There are motorcycles which are electrical. And we are trying to work with Kenya and our neighbors. Tanzania has gas. We are planning to use the route that is going to carry the crude oil from Hoima to Tanga, to use the same route to get the natural gas from Tanzania. Like I said, we should not be timid to exploit our natural resources. We have oil in Africa. It is that oil that is going to be utilized to get money, to work on the infrastructure that we need. We are here crying for support, yet we are a rich continent. We are looking at people who exploited their petroleum reserves to get money. Now, to work on clean cooking, for example. We are using firewood. We must exploit these resources to get LPG. It's better I use LPG in cooking than using charcoal. Cutting down a tree, 30 years old, burn it for charcoal, and then burn the charcoal to get firewood. It's a trilemma that we are in. So we must come up with policies as government, policies that can guide the exploitation of the natural resources sustainably and responsibly, policies in the upstream that ban flaring of gas, for example, that ban venting, so that you can reduce on the carbon emission, but to say that Africa must be suppressed, that we should not develop our petroleum reserves, and then we need money to invest in electricity infrastructure. We need money to be able to provide affordable electricity, and then you borrow money at high interest rates, and you expect accessibility and affordability, it will be a joke. Africa is rich with her natural resources. Let us exploit these natural resources responsibly, get money, invest into clean energy, and then save the climate. Otherwise, as leaders, we have to work together. The resources that you have at the neighborhood are resources for your neighbor. Uganda is open, we have the network to share the resources that we have. This is what I can submit for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Nankabirwa. And so the initiative that Dr. Shaker mentioned on COP27's initiative is even more valuable because it's a meeting place to get these different opinions on the table, worked out, and on track for a just and equitable energy transition for Africa. We have then on this other side, to your left, Dr. Shaker, we have the partners who will also play an important role in this initiative. And I'm very pleased to introduce His Excellency Dan Jorgensen, Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities of Denmark, Ms. Faten Agad, Senior Advisor for Climate Diplomacy from the African Climate Foundation, and Mr. Patrick Dupuy, Head of BCG in Africa. So with this side, we'll have this next several minutes of reflections in terms of what you've been hearing from both COP27 presidency as well as from the African leadership. And I'd like to start with you, Minister Jorgensen, because Denmark has already been a global frontrunner in many of these issues of transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. Denmark has also been working very closely with 19 countries globally to help them in terms of their transition. 4 countries, I believe, in Africa. From all that experience, what do you see as necessary for speeding up this transition in Africa?
Yes, well, thank you. First of all, let me make something clear. There's no doubt for me that this needs to be a just transition. I mean, imagine the injustice if some of the poorest countries on the planet, which we know will be the ones that will be hit hardest by climate change, would also not benefit from the transition that we need to fight climate change. So not only do they pay because they will be hit the hardest by the consequences, they will also pay in the transition. That's just not feasible, it's just not fair, and we need to avoid that. Now, the good news is that if we look at the transformation that we need, I would argue that going from a fossil-driven energy system into a renewable energy-driven energy system with a focus on energy efficiency is actually also the most affordable and the cheapest way of making an economic strategy for your country. So even if we did not have the ambition to fight climate change, probably we would still be using these new sources of energy because they are the most rational ones. Now, with that as a point of departure, let me just share an anecdote with you, because I've visited many African countries, and in some of them I've had similar experiences where I've gone to see people in a village that was, well, to be quite frank, a very poor village that still needed a lot of development. Not a lot of things were well functioning. But one thing that surprised me was that everybody had mobile phones, and the coverage of the phones was better than the one that I'm used to in the village that I'm from in Denmark. So why is that? Well, because the transformation of the communication sector in many of these countries has been extremely efficient. They haven't had to go through the development that, for instance, my own country had. You know, I remember when I was a kid, we had a fixed line telephone, and then the first mobile phones, they were, I mean, it's a stretch to call them mobile because they were 5 kilos and extremely expensive, you know, but for many of these villages, they've never seen those kinds of phones. They've never had a fixed phone line. They went directly to the best technology. Now, I think for many parts of the developing world, many parts of Africa, that's a perfect analogy for what we need to do with energy. You don't have to make the same mistakes as others have made. You don't have to use old-fashioned, expensive technology. You can use the newest. One example, in 1991, we established the first offshore wind farm in Denmark. Now, a lot of people were looking at us, shaking their heads and saying, why are you doing this? That's an extremely inefficient, very expensive way to create energy. And it was. But because we did it, we've now developed, together with a lot of other partners, and of course now it's a global technology, but it's developed and can compete with nuclear and coal in price. Now, that's a concrete example. I think for all renewable energy technologies, if there are some global ground rules that I at least would advise to follow, knowing very well that all countries are different, it would be one, efficient, data-driven political decision-making and ambitious decision-making. You need to set targets and goals. So analyze, what do we need? When do we need it? What are the policy instruments that we can use? Second, stable framework conditions. Because no matter how you do this, you will need big investments and you'll need private investments. And it's very difficult to get them if you don't have stable framework conditions. So they need to know what kind of regulation are there. Not necessarily that the regulation cannot be pretty strict towards businesses. It can, but it needs to be stable. And same goes for subsidies. What kind of subsidies levels are they looking at for how long? And that brings me then to the third final point. Collaboration between private and public partners is absolutely essential because even though I doubt very much that any country can do this without having a strong government driving the process, I'm just as certain that it cannot be done if you don't do it in collaboration with a private sector because no government will have the expertise to do this alone, and you'll need the global players that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister Jorgensen, for putting some of those points on the table. And I know from speaking with other Danish colleagues, this is a continual effort that has to happen. On a cycle, annual, biannual, it spreads across different governments clearly. But even in Denmark, it's work to get this right. I'd like to turn then to another stakeholder in the partnership ecosystem, and that's the role of philanthropy. And we have Faten Agad from African Climate Foundation, who has been on the front lines of seeing the catalytic opportunities that philanthropy starts to drive. In your view, and focused on the discussion that we're having today, how do you see the role of philanthropy for supporting the Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition Initiative?
Thank you very much, Glenn. Well, first, sabah al-khair, good morning to everybody. I'd like to say congratulations, mabruk, to the COP27 presidency and Egypt, but also the colleagues, and I'd like to recognize really the efforts of Safe4All and other partners in this partnership for rallying many voices really to support the launch that we have before us today. I wanted to speak particularly on the role of philanthropy and just to highlight how far we've come as well as philanthropies in supporting the just transition, particularly in the African continent. Since 2015, climate philanthropy financing has been increasing consistently by 30% per annum. Last year, philanthropy collectively invested around $140 million in Africa alone, but that remains extremely limited. And so we'd like to increase the ambition And we've announced, in fact, just on the 11th here at the COP that we would be increasing as philanthropy investments, particularly focusing on the just transition, an increase to the tune of 500 million over the next 3 years. And the focus will be on both middle income and low income countries. The important role of philanthropy is to catalyze financing, to catalyze funding, but it's in no means to replace the public and private finance, which needs to come at scale to be able to allow us to support the efforts at country and regional level. Now, that being said, I wanted to speak briefly about what is already being done on the ground, including our role as an African Climate Foundation. We're the first African-based and African-led climate foundation working particularly on the climate development nexus, because we do recognize that there is an important environmental aspect, but there's also an economic dimension, a socio-economic dimension to the transition, which we feel needs to be at the center of the discussion if we are to talk about a just transition for the African continent. And a lot of work, I would say, has been done in specific country cases, and the ambition is really to work with other partners, including C4All and others, to look at what could be done elsewhere. But we've been very closely involved, for instance, in South Africa, in Senegal, in Nigeria, in Namibia, particularly to try and support efforts of these countries to design their just transition. And there the involvement has been on two fronts. I think Damilola raised earlier the question of the need to have the data, the need to have the analysis, the technical assessment that will allow African countries to design sequenced a transition that is just also for their population, and it's just for themselves, for the economy, for development, for the continent. So the focus has been really twofold. One is the supporting more the technical capacity to design these plans, to design sequence strategies, both at country level, taking into account the country context, but there's also an ambition to look at it at a regional level. I think the regional power pools were raised, the question of the regional power pools were raised earlier, and those are the kind of discussions that we need to boost and to support even more. And the second one, in terms of philanthropic support, is really to catalyze funding, to secure additional funding, to come in areas where public and private finance cannot necessarily come. Questions such as early project development phase, for instance, and support those early stages of development, not only in the energy sector, but rightly so. I think the question of how do we develop and promote also value chain development, because on the African continent, I think the resources that we have need to be leveraged in order to integrate the African economies into this global value chain for green technology. On that note, let me again say thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing our engagement in this exciting initiative. Thank you.
So there's some interest, Dr. Shaker, in partners to support this initiative, which is very, very good. I'd like to maybe just take one step back. Minister Jorgensen made the mention of the importance of public-private efforts. We need innovation. We need the expertise. Patrick Dupu is head of BCG in Africa. Give us a perspective from where you sit, Patrick, and based on the experience that BCG has, on what the private sector sees as an opportunity here with Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition Initiative.
Thank you, Glenn. And again, I'd like to thank the Egyptian presidency, as well as C4All, IEA, ARENA for working together over the last weeks to frame this initiative. So I think everything has been said. So I will just tell one story. The story of South Africa. That's not energy access, that's energy transition. Phasing out of coal, in the country that was emitting half of African emissions, purely based on coal, with 35% unemployment rate. So you could say that transitioning out of coal, when you have this type of challenges, it's certainly not the priority. However, last year in Glasgow, that was probably the most comprehensive, ambitious transition plan that was presented. And again, yesterday, it was presented in much more detail, not only the pledges to pathways, but we presented together with the South African stakeholders the pathways to projects, to business plan. And this is why President Ramaphosa was actually chairing the World Leaders Summit on Just Transition last week. So what happened in South Africa? The plan was built with the private sector. NBI, with the private sector, the top 30 CEOs of the country were sitting every month to actually discuss the energy transition plan. Second, it was data-driven, as you said. Data-driven to actually show that it was possible. That was unthinkable was actually possible. And that's potentially cheaper, as you said. And it was relevant. If you want to export tomorrow to Europe, to the US, you need to be low carbon. So for South Africa, there was a pathway that was feasible, but you need to base that, as you said, on data. Third, it was comprehensive. It was not only about power, energy, it was all industrial sector, agriculture. It needs to be a comprehensive transition plan. Fourth, it was detailed, precise. In 2025, we phase out this coal plant. 2027, we phase out this plant. It needs to be detailed. It needs a lot of work, and that's what it took 2 years to make it happen. Then it was adapted to the South African reality, which is unique. Every country has its unique context and reality. Access to renewable energies, access to other sources of energies. And finally, it was just. The social element, analyzing the impact, which population would lose their job, what is the reskilling required, in which areas, in which counties, in which cities, how do you reskill all this labor force was critical. And as a result, it was financed. $8.5 billion, partnership, and now what was impressive yesterday is just the consensus that has been built in a number of stakeholders that none of them thought it was feasible at the start. So I will end by, if we have succeeded to do that in a coal-heavy country on the energy transition, I hope we can do the same on energy access. And I will close by a comment from a remark from Nelson Mandela. It was impossible until it was done.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And we're coming to the last few remarks of this session. And I'd like to ask Dr. Shaker now for his views, because you've been able to hear some of the very powerful statements from African leadership. You've been able to hear some of the ideas that are coming from partners who, as Fatan mentioned, are interested in being very supportive. How do you see, or how does the COP27 presidency see this priority moving forward over the next 5 years, especially because we're at a point where the global energy map is shifting? Some reflections, please.
Thank you for that. Let me go back to the speech which I was giving at the beginning. Actually, there was a couple of pages I did not put in front of the audience because I was trying to keep the time, actually. But let me actually come to these things. Getting to my papers here. First, we put an action plan, a very quick action plan, in order to see how we can implement this initiative. We expect to invite the African Union member states to officially join the initiatives, and relying on the historical and continuous relationship between Egypt and all African countries. We're going to contacting the key development partners like IEA, like IRENA, like GIS, like UNDP, and the existing relevant programs and initiatives like the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, like Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership, to identify the key gaps and the proposed means to overcome these gaps in our initiative, to coordinate as well with the development of partners like IEA, IRENA, GIS, and UNDP to support the consultation services required to develop a first proposal for the governance and operation models. Also, to conduct a high-level workshop gathering the African Union, member states, regional organizations like AFDB, key development partners like IEA, IRENA, GIZ, UNDP, and donors as well, like the World Bank, EBRD, AFD, and so on, to discuss the availability of financial support, pledges, implementation modalities, organization structure, and define the initiative host organization. I hope this is just started as a roadmap, but you know what? In Egypt, when we do things, we're doing very quick. Perhaps when we, at the last session, we said that we were suffering enormously from power cuts in the year 2014. Major power cuts. Actually, we managed in 3.5 years' time to add to the network the same capacity which was available at 2014. We added 30 gigawatt in 3.5 years' time. In the same time, we did not only took care of the generation, but we already tried to improve the transmission. We spend a hell of a money on transmission because we felt that infrastructure and transmission network is very important. We have in mind actually to generate electricity from renewables and even to interconnect with Europe in order to export this. And by the way, we have 3 different projects now to study the interconnection between Egypt and Europe. So I believe that we will treat this initiative and we will follow it up the same way we've been used to follow in our projects in the Ministry of Electricity, and we hope that we will implement this in a very short time, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shaker. The concluding remarks, the COP27 presidency, because this is a forward-looking, because this is about implementation, the concluding remarks were requested of SRSG Damilola Ugumbi around precisely what might be the potential future that is seen from the partners' perspective on this Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition Initiative. Microphone, please.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I just want to put things in perspective. We spoke about investments needed. We spoke about Africa being able to go straight to clean energy, but we didn't speak about the reality on ground. And the reality is, I think last year, about 0.6% of all the renewable investments in the world came to Africa. So when we talk about anybody transitioning or energy access or any energy poverty, it cannot start from such a low base. So financial commitments have to be kept for Africa to really, really develop. And there's no scenario, there's no evidence base that it's okay to get to a point of net zero while leaving 1 billion people in energy poverty. It just doesn't exist. So I'd like to leave you guys with that. Thank you.
On behalf of the COP27 presidency, thank you very much for joining this session. Have a wonderful Energy Day, and I believe there's another session starting shortly. Thank you.
Huh? Mr. Tim. Mr. Tim.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, sir.
Ahmed Mina, First Under Secretary, National Test.
Very nice to meet you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Excuse me, guests. We need to start the next session, please. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, Dr. Mr. Glenn, it is a very good session, and yani, thank you so much for this moderation.
You stayed in time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So how do they do with the microphones? Yeah, so if they are on their way. I see those two.
How is the technique? So how do we talk? How do we microphones or how do the mic? And we will all get a mic.
Each speaker will have a mic. They don't have them. Okay.
Way to do the logistics also. she's my reference. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats, we shall begin shortly with the permission of our kind hosts from the Egyptian Presidency. We will start since we have a great topic and we have a fantastic panel. And Minister Dr. Faoud from Egypt will join us as soon as she can. My name is Tim Gould. I am the Chief Energy Economist at the International Energy Agency. And we're going to talk for the next, until 12 o'clock, we're going to talk about delivering clean energy at a time of global crisis, a conversation about energy security and climate change. And we have an extraordinary panel to help us through this crucial topic, because indeed we are living in a time of multiple global crises. The energy crisis that we're all aware of, but also a food security crisis, the many economic difficulties that countries are facing at the moment, increasingly visible signs of climate change. And as we address one of these, we need to make sure we don't make the resolution of other crises more difficult. There's one common denominator to all of the crisis situations that we face, is that the vulnerable in our societies and in the international system are facing the most difficult challenges. At the International Energy Agency, we track the number of people who lack access to electricity. And one of the truly sad indicators that we have for the last couple of years is that because of COVID, because of today's crisis, the number of people without access to electricity worldwide has started to rise. It's the first time we've seen that since we started tracking that more than 2 decades ago. I think we all recognize that if we fail to address the climate crisis, then that will be bad for energy security, that will be bad for food security, that will be bad for our economies, bad for all sorts of things that we hold dear. And that's why at the International Energy Agency, secure, rapid transformation of the energy system is very much at the heart of what we do, and that's the mandate that we received from our IA ministerial meeting earlier this year, which was chaired by Secretary Granholm. Our analysis shows that clean energy, efficiency, the lasting solutions to the difficulties that we face today. But we can also see in the short term that during the immediate crisis, governments and consumers scramble for energy that's available, whether it's clean or not. So what I'd like to do to kick off this panel is ask each of our distinguished guests about that short-term response. And I'd like to get very brief views from everyone on the same question. So what can you do as policymakers to ensure that our immediate responses to today's crisis are aligned with those long-term climate goals? And if you allow, I'd like to ask Secretary Granholm to say a few words to kick us off.
Testing. Okay. Thank you so much, Tim, for the question. Such an important question. You know, I think it is really important for us to consider today's energy needs and tomorrow's energy needs together, that this is not a zero sum, that we have to be growing the pie, meaning growing the energy pie, but especially with clean. So it is, you know, I think it's, we cannot assume that countries that with a large portion of population that do not have access to electricity, that they can automatically just jump into clean. We understand that, and it would be unfortunate to suggest that what is good for one part of the world is the same solution for another part of the world. But I do think that for nations that are really trying to move into this transition, to accelerate clean is a way of growing the pie and not necessarily taking away from the opportunity of other countries to put their citizens with an ability to turn on lights or have lights at all. So I think it's very important for us to focus on growth, addition, rather than subtraction at this moment. Obviously, the Europeans are in this moment where they are focused on keeping lights on as well. Many places in Africa are looking to put people onto electricity. And so how do we grow in a way that allows people access to electricity and allows us to grow into clean is really, I think we have to think about enlarging rather than a zero sum.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Secretary Granholm. If you wouldn't mind passing the microphone to the gentleman on your left, because I'd like to get the perspective now from the Minister of Hydro Resources and Electricity from the DRC, Minister Moise Mokaleng. Please, on the same question, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I first would like to congratulate and thank the Arab Republic of Egypt for a great organization, and especially the presidency of COP27. I think we have a chance here with green energy, such as solar energy, to impact quickly our populations, because that type of energy can be deployed quickly in various areas. We look at a country like Congo DRC, we have a very big disadvantage. We have a country that has 2.3 million square kilometers. So you want to reach out to every single corner of the population. Well, you want to do it with a process that can be fast, that can be cheap. And I think here with solar energy, we have that chance, because solar energy can be deployed quickly in various parts of the country. And it can be deployed in areas where there's no grid. It's basically areas where we don't have transmission lines. So we can use solar energy, we can use this type of clean energy to promote. We as leaders, we have to promote that type of energy. We have to make sure that we educate our people about it, because there is a belief in countries like Africa, in African countries like DRC, that we can't really rely on solar energy, but it's not true. Today we have seen, in DRC we've launched a program where we're going to give infrastructure to 145 territories, and section of it is energy. Well, we use solar energy today to deploy quickly. So I think today we've got a great chance to use clean energy to impact our populations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Again, if you wouldn't mind passing the microphone to Minister Fawad from our hosts from Egypt, perhaps the same question to you about the alignment of your immediate reactions to today's crisis with your long-term goals.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very good question in the middle of an energy crisis. Twofold answers to that question. First, you need to make sure that your planning process is adaptive to the different external factors and changes. For example, in Egypt, we have the energy strategy. And when we started developing our NDC, we assured that there is an alignment between, first, the overall sustainable development strategy of the country, the energy strategy, and the NDC, from the very holistic approach. And I think this should be the same for each country in order to be able to select the appropriate energy mix and the pathway that leads to the lowest carbon pathways. And this is very important because there's no size that fits all. So first of all, alignment of the planning process and the interlinkages between the energy sector and the climate as well as the sustainable development processes is extremely important to do the appropriate line of planning and to be flexible in a way that you would be able to change that. For example, in Egypt, when we developed our climate change strategy, the objectives and the vision would remain the same. But the packaging of the projects that is attached to that strategy could be changed within 5 years, 10 years. This is one thing. Number two, we need to make three things within that process: informed, affordable, and supported. These are the three miracle keywords for the energy transition. Informed means you need to be informed of the best technologies and pathway and study that and assess that for your energy mix. Affordable, make sure that your selection would be able to be locally affordable and produced vis-a-vis technology transfer, which is a part of the Paris Agreement. Last but not least, supported. Every time you step in, you need to ensure that the enabling environment with policies, regulations, incentives, inclusion with the private sector, differentiating the governance of the role of the private vis-a-vis the public sector is extremely important. Those three things would really pave the way within the energy crisis for a world to adapt to what's happening around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And now to Commissioner Abu Zaid. I mean, you look at the situation across multiple countries, and perhaps you can share your perspectives on that and that alignment of short and long-term actions.
Thank you very much, Tim, but I thought you'll start by making an observation. You haven't noticed that there are so many women leading energy in the world. You should have said that. And even earlier in the opening session, it was the same thing. Never miss that. Yesterday was the gender day. Remember that. And then we also have the woman leading even the COP. Very important. Earlier also to remind everyone, Minister Shaker was mentioning about Egypt moving from deficit in energy to surplus in energy in less than 4 years. For those who know his ministry, the 3 or 4 pillars of his ministry were led by women who did this miracle for Egypt. So kudos for women in energy, really. Going back to your point. Now, how can we align our objectives or the work that we do to align our objectives or the work that we do with the net zero ambitions? One, from the beginning, the African Agenda 2063, which is our Africa strategy, clearly and explicitly mentioned that we do have mandate us to work with urgency on climate matters. And this is reflected in all the projects that are led by the African Union, all the initiatives that are led by the African Union, all renewable energy, all meant to support our countries developing their pathway, net zero pathway transition. It's data-driven thanks to Africa database, very elaborate, and also call for complementarity and integration in the continent. And this is one of the most ambitious programs that we are having. In June last year, we launched the African Single Electricity Market, linking and integrating the electricity market in the continent, whether it's generation and transmission. And our work is now on the master plan for the continent and the harmonization of policies and regulations across the continent to make sure that the single electricity market is operational by the year 2040. The second action is finance, and I did mention that in the opening speech. There is no net zero with zero finance. So we have to make sure that finance is coming to the continent. Remember, the continent received less than 2% of green of the international green finance. That cannot continue, and we are working to dispel this baseless perception of Africa as a risky continent, and I repeat, it is baseless and it's not data supported. So for investors, do your homework. And in this COP, we launched last week the African Green Infrastructure Alliance, together with the African Development Bank, together with Africa 50, together with the Rockefeller Foundation, many institutional investors, several MDBs, in order to ensure that we bring to financial closure private sector-led renewable energy and green infrastructure projects. The value of this, the first phase is about $10 billion. So again, it's an invitation for the private sector institutional investors to join us in this effort. The third is, as I said, harmonization of policies, but I want to emphasize something. Also, the image of the continent has to change, because it's as if we're not doing enough. There are 22 African countries who depend mainly on renewable energy, and we have several African countries whose main source of energy, 95%, come from renewable resources. So really, the continent is doing more than anybody would think, and Africa is the region, though we still have energy poverty, the region with the highest share of renewable energy in our energy mix, more than the global average, more than any other region in the world. And I think.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now, another Commissioner, Commissioner Kadri Simpson from the European Union. European Union is clearly at the center of many of these developments. So your perspective on managing those short-term impacts of the crisis in alignment with the European Union's long-term goals would be very welcome.
Good afternoon. And first of all, I want to assure you that our current energy crisis has not changed our commitment to become climate neutral by 2050. And this is in our law, climate law, the obligation that our 27 member states have to do their utmost so that by 2050 we will be climate neutral. Of course, the current year is extremely challenging also for Europe, because Russia is manipulating with its gas flows. Russia was just a year ago the main supplier of natural gas, and as you all know, it doesn't have alternative infrastructure pipeline routes, so the gas that is not sold based on existing contracts will be either flared or rented. And that has created a tense situation at global markets. So our response, first of all, is to cut our natural gas consumption. Our member states agreed that we will cut our natural gas consumption by 15%. We have achieved that. We made this agreement in the middle of July, and we achieved this already in August and September. I don't have the latest data on October, but the aim for that is exactly to ease the situation in the global markets. Of course, this is not enough to replace the Russian fossil fuels, and we will prioritize also fuel switch. So where we can, we will replace fossil gas with renewables, we will electrify, and we will accelerate the renewable transition. Wind and solar, they do have lots of potential in Europe, but they even do have higher potential in Africa. And this was also one of the reasons why in the spring, when we had EU-Africa summit, the green initiative, green energy initiative was announced, and I hope that, and together with Dr. Abu Saeed, we will have a chance for follow-up after 2 weeks when you will come to Brussels, and we will host college-to-college meeting in Brussels. This is now our chance to host you. Last time we visited you in Ethiopia. And on top of that, there are lots of trusted partners for Europe who can help us in this situation where there is war ongoing in Europe. Russia attacked its peaceful neighbor. And we are reaching out to our trusted partners, not only to buy alternative gas, but to strengthen this partnership beyond this decade, and to give clear boost for green hydrogen. So also at the margins of this COP, we will sign several memorandums of understanding, and tomorrow I hope we will have a chance, I know that we will have a chance to sign one very important MOU with Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Simpson. I'd like to move now to a perspective from the private sector, from Siemens Energy. Crisis disruptive. Has it disrupted your view of where the private sector needs to go on these issues?
I think I'm representing here the industry, and I will give a perspective from the industry point of view. We think there is a need for accelerating and broadening the application of renewable energy. We have an opportunity now with the crisis. We have to do. When it comes to intermediate solution, right, we will need intermediate solution. You see Germany importing, building import terminal, etc. The key is to build a solution that are sustainable for the future. And this is where the industry can help, right? I give you an example. If you build a plant that utilizes gas, make it then in future operable with hydrogen, for example. When you look on contract for importing LNG, make sure that your contract is not so long that you are locked to that LNG for the long term, and you can switch when the renewable is coming. So these are the key elements. Work for the future and do solution for the intermediate time that allow us not to be locked, but they allow us to do the transition. When you look at the renewables, there are some of the key elements that we see as an industry, which one is the acceleration of the project, right? And I think the REPowerEU gives some sign in that direction, pushing for a shorter approval. But this is really what we need. We need an implementation of this shorter approval time for project. We need to complete all the activity that we started with Fit for 55 and the Delegated Act. And we need the partnership. And what I mean with partnership, I mean, you see a lot of partners you sign, but particularly for Africa, we need partnership like what the German government is working on to allow the financing costs for projects in this continent to go to the same level that you would have in a project in Europe or the US or China, because only with that you can make the cost of the renewable accessible, right? Renewable are capital and cost of capital. So we need to work on the cost of capital, and I think these are the key instruments for Europe to be able to access the energy that is coming from this continent.
Thank you very much indeed. Maybe we can work the microphone back down to the Secretary Granholm, because I'd like to turn back to you and a question about the reaction over the last 18 months in the US with, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, but also the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that preceded it. That's providing a huge boost to clean energy deployment. But there's also, I think, a very important energy security thread running through the actions taken by the US administration. So I'd like you to pick up that thread and explain a little bit how you're building security into the approach that you're taking to accelerating transitions.
Yes, thanks so much. I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine demonstrates that we all have to be considering what makes us energy secure and who our partners are in that. Russia has proven itself to be an unreliable partner, which is an exclamation point on why countries should identify their own means to their own energy security. And so in the United States, we did a series of studies on which elements of the supply chain for this clean energy future we were missing. And and devised a policy strategy to fill in those gaps. So for example, today is the 1-year anniversary of the bipartisan infrastructure law. One of the areas that we had lacked was to build up the full supply chain for batteries, for electric vehicle, as well as for long duration storage. And so we have gone about now incentivizing the pieces of the supply chain to come to the United States that we did not have before. It is important that the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed, we're so happy to see the results of having put incentives in place to have the private sector really fill in those gaps. This clean energy future, in our view, should be government-enabled but private sector-led. And in order to have the private sector lead, the incentives have to be in place. And so, as a result, since August, when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, the 30% tax credits that were put on clean energy, especially in the manufacturing side, we've seen about $30 billion of announcements of clean energy manufacturing expansions in the United States, which is great. That builds up our energy security. This notion of security is so important for all countries. As our counterpart, Minister Eamon from Ireland has said, you cannot weaponize access to the sun. You cannot weaponize access to wind. In fact, this clean energy, homegrown clean energy solutions could be the greatest peace plan the world has ever seen, because we will be able to devise our own means for security and not rely upon countries whose values we do not share, who have aggressive strategies to be able to, for hegemony or what other reasons. So we see energy security and this building out of the clean energy industry hugely important for our economy, but also for our national security.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Maybe, Minister, I'd like to explore with you the way that this discussion may play out in an African context, because the resources of the DRC in this sense are extraordinary. We're all aware of the hydropower riches, the various Inga projects, and that raises the question about whether this transformation in Africa will be led by very large infrastructure projects that cross multiple countries of the sort that the hydro projects in DRC represent, or whether it will be more local, national, bottom-up, solar-driven. How do you see those two, the balance between those two approaches playing out?
Thank you very much. I think the two have to work together. We obviously, as we know, Congo DRC has got a great potential, hydroelectric potential. We estimate the hydro potential to 100 gigawatt, but we also have other sources of energy that can amount about 70 gigawatt. But the huge projects such as Inga project should be used for developing the industry. And by developing the industry, we will enhance social development, we will create jobs for our population, we will reduce poverty, and eventually the pressure on, because you see the problem is in Africa, access to electricity automatically create another problem. We have population putting pressure on our forests because the alternative is coal. The alternative will be deforestation. So if we want to reduce that, we have to enhance the social development for our people by creating jobs, by giving them access to electricity. That we can do with big projects. But as a responsibility, as governments, we also have to reach out to all the corners of the country, rural areas, even some of the cities that are far away from the grid. And that we can only do with mixed energy. We can only do it with renewable energy because it's fast, like I said, because it can be used in isolated grids, and we can do it quickly. But the problem will also be the price. That's where we need to come together and realize that Africa needs funding. Funding. We need funding so that we can reach to all those populations. With the Congolese government, we have created ANSER. It's an agency that is for aim of reaching out to rural and rural areas in the country. So it's a government initiative, but I would like to call upon the private sector to bite in, because we need funding from the private sector. We need them to come on board so that we allow them to give energy, access to energy to our population that are remotely placed. So I think both of them have to go together. We can't do one without the other one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. If I may, I'd like now to turn to Minister Fawad from Egypt. Egypt has made great strides with investment in renewables, but it's also a major producer and consumer of natural gas. So I'd like to ask about the position of gas in your strategy and in your energy security vision for Egypt. And this question that also came up from Mr. Innocenzi about this, how do you make some of those gas developments compatible with the transformation of the energy sector?
Thank you very much for that question. You know, it is a long journey, whether it's for Egypt or for any other country, with the just transition and the focus on more renewables. Rome was not built in one day, and you cannot move also from zero to hero to that part. Our NDC had two important figures that I like to step in here that we had announced last July. And I would like to highlight that last July was still in the middle of the energy crisis worldwide. But yet we were very ambitious on that. The first figure is the 42% of the renewable energy mix by 2035, and the increase of reliance of more renewable. And that included the first batch of intervention of adding 10 gigawatt of renewable, phasing out 5 gigawatt of power plants that are functioning and operating with natural gas. That's number one. And even we went further before the COP by 2 days in collaboration with the US and Germany of getting more ambitious. So would like to lead by example that the 2035 is 2030. So we're cutting down 5 years from our original plan that was submitted actually 3 months or 4 months ago. Secondly, on the oil and gas sector, and as Egypt submitted its first NDC that never had any figures, and understanding the energy crisis, yet we wanted to be ambitious but realistic on the just transition. So we had included the 65% reduction of the flaring gas from the oil and gas sector, which is a huge amount by 2030. In addition, definitely to the 7% of the reduction of the emissions from the transport sector. Just to give you an idea of the electricity sector and what we would like to achieve in that regard, the replacement of the 10 gigawatt that I'm talking about between 2022 till 2028 would reduce around 6 million equivalent of CO2 annually by that part. This shows how much we're trying to push further our climate agenda at the national level, how we're making the transition, allowing the private sector, including even sectors that was never there, such as the oil and gas, which is one of the biggest sectors in our country, heavily relying on the GCP, but yet we know that the climate and development would be able to reconcile, and that's what we've been doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to turn to Commissioner. You mentioned in your first response, the second point was around finance. And you've been very vocal about the need for different parties to step up, international community and private sector, and rethink their attitude towards investments in Africa. And I think you mentioned that there's a baseless perception of Africa as a risky continent. Yet we are moving from an era of relatively cheap money into an era of higher borrowing costs, and that will, in a sense, exacerbate some of the issues around the higher cost of capital that faces many African clean energy projects. So how can we address this? What are you looking for also from the international community in that respect?
Why don't I ask you that question? If you had money looking at the world and what's happening around the world, where would you put your money? Africa is the safest place. Africa is the land of opportunity. There isn't a region in the world that has the opportunities that Africa has now, before and even more today. When I say that we do have energy poverty, that is investors' wealth. This is the opportunity waiting to happen. And now, as we speak, this race towards renewable energy, green hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, even batteries, all the minerals that are needed for minerals are in Africa. Where else would you invest? Now, it is the time now for us as well, and I'm saying this also to our African counterparts. This is the time to localize. This is the time to develop the value chains within our continent. This is the time for Africa to be part of the global supply chain and not just be an exporter. Use the opportunity wisely. Investment is here, and I'm telling everybody, there is no other place better to invest than in the continent, but also for us in the continent, the improvement of that investment climate, the harnessing of the opportunity, even the discussion of the contract, and I will go even to that detail, and I've seen with my own eyes very, very bad contracts being developed on this. I mean, I'll go to that detail, and I've seen horrendous things, wasting our resources, wasting our most valuable potentials. So please use the opportunity wisely. I'm not worried at all about investments coming to Africa. I am only paying attention and calling for everybody to pay attention to the details and to harnessing this fantastic opportunity. And by doing that, we're not only serving Africa, by the way, we're serving the world. I mean, we've heard about this green hydrogen fantastic deal that's been struck with Egypt. It helps Egypt. It helps the importing countries. Now, the link, I hope Egypt is also considering to do is how to make green hydrogen work for Egypt as well. How to start changing the industries to be linked to this green hydrogen and start refitting the installations and refitting, you know, the supply chain to make it work for Egypt as well, not just for export. So we need more of that. Same thing for batteries. When you're talking about DRC, who else would have more minerals for batteries than DRC? Why the batteries are not produced in DRC? That's 30% less the cost of batteries, but also fantastic job opportunities in his country, and fantastic contribution to the socio-economic development in the continent and the world. So let us use this. There is a window of opportunity for the whole world, and Africa is not excluded. Let's use it wisely. But in terms of finance, even the cost of finance with what's happening around the world, I tell you, the safest place to invest, the brightest and most and richest place to invest is in Africa. Thank you.
Perhaps we can pick up on these remarks also talking with Commissioner Simpson, because there is a lot of attention paid to the way that the European Commission and the European Union is looked to accelerate transitions within Europe. But then what about that external dimension? I mean, what is the value proposition for countries in Africa, for example, from the changes that are taking place more rapidly now in Europe?
I think that there has been no other year than 2022 when we understand that global partnerships are so essential and necessary. And the European Union has several strong partnerships in the energy sector, all of them with our trusted partners. I see here Jennifer, and well, EU-US partnership was the one of the kind where we designed the next ones based on that that trust. We do understand that even on our transition towards energy neutrality, Europe will consume more energy than we can produce ourselves. We will scale up our solar production. We will produce six-fold more offshore wind by the end of this decade, and still it's not enough. This is the reason why we do have interconnections with our closest partners. I myself, I was just in October in Algeria. In northern Africa, we do have subsea electricity cables, and of course it would make sense that this trade that is mutually beneficial will also consist green electricity. Because I don't see that there is any economical or real social benefits to continue the power generation with the help of coal. We all know that environmental and health impacts at local level are such that we cannot talk about coal in the long run. And even in Europe, we see that renewables are providing best price for the retail consumers. So if this is the case already in Europe with limited sun and wind potential, it should be here even more visible. So there are energy dialogues with our trusted partners. There is a clear framework in place how we can support our partners both in Africa but also in our eastern neighborhood with their energy transition, and it makes sense. It creates local jobs and brings benefits for the environment that we all will need.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now, Mr. Innocenzi, from the perspective of Siemens Energy, what are we missing here? Are there some things technologies that are not moving ahead fast enough to ensure security during fast period of change? Are there investments that you think at the moment are blind spots for? I mean, you have an audience of extremely important policymakers here. Where do we need to act faster on the technology side?
I think I have the perfect audience, and I did my homework, so I prepare with some of the elements. I think one of the key aspects is we want to increase the renewable, the overall power production in the world from something like 25,000 terawatt to 35 in 2030, right? And a big part of that will come from renewable, from 3 to 9 to 15, depending on the scenario you look at. Now, all these renewable will allow us to do direct electrification, will help us only if we have the grid infrastructure. So the key element is we need to electrify as much as we can with renewable and bring this electricity to the consumer. I think I have a number for the US, right? And the US already identified, I'm not telling you something you don't know, 60% increase in the US infrastructure for grid transmission by 2030. I mean, Siemens Energy, obviously, we are working on helping that. And I think it's extremely critical that we keep tracking that development. We can very easily and very slip out of these targets if we don't continuously monitor the development, because private company will do the investment, but we need to keep monitoring and see how we are applying that. There are other elements which I call the reality check. And I think we need to be very careful. And also their continuous monitor. European Union, we want to increase renewable wind from 190 to 510 gigawatt by 2030. This is 39 gigawatt a year. Siemens Energy is a large manufacturer of wind turbine. If I look at the project that we see in the next 5 years, we see only every year something like 19 to 20 gigawatt, and we need 39. So we have to look at how do we get there, and this is the point where we need to look at reality check. I have another reality check which concerns me very much because I'm taking care of the hydrogen business as well. And I look at the study that you guys published, right? And there are different scenarios. And if you look at the announcement of electrolyzer capacity, you would say, yeah, we are on track. Reality, we see already a lot of these announcements not materializing. I mean, we are investing heavily, and we think we will be on track. But we had the history of 175 years industrialization, right? So is it really going to be there? And not only that, when you look at large project, multi-gigawatt project, with large company and developers, etc., these guys don't take electrolyzer from a startup. They want a company that deliver constantly and continuously over years and years and years. What does it mean? That even if on paper we believe that we will have enough infrastructure to produce hydrogen, reality, I'm concerned that we will not have it because the announcement will not help us. So I think these are, for me, some of the critical aspects. And if I can conclude with one element, and I use a point from your study as well, vulnerability, that we are going to have new vulnerability. So we need to be very carefully looking at metals, where are the metals coming from, and how do these metals play in the overall infrastructure?
Thank you so much. And I think we're coming to the end of our panel. Thank you so much to our very distinguished group for this. I'm particularly pleased to see early implementation of the commitments made during Gender Day. So it's great to have a very well-balanced panel. And thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Could you make an announcement about the Egyptian pavilion?
Ladies and gentlemen, please, before leaving, we are having now, ladies and gentlemen, we are having 2 hours for ceremonies for signing Egypt frameworks for hydrogen and launching the Egyptian strategy, and we have ceremony for 2 hours in the Egyptian pavilion. Please join us. Feel free to join us for the next 2 hours in the Egyptian pavilions for the frameworks agreements announcement and signing ceremony. Thank you. It will start from 12 now up to 2 p.m. Please join us. Thank you, Mr. Tom.